we have stakeholders and partners from international communities together with us today. So allow me to proceed in English. When Malaysia celebrated independence just over 67 years ago, our founding fathers had the daunting task of managing a post-colonial economy. Blessed with natural resources, British officials then considered our country a material prize and were among the biggest sterling earners of the Commonwealth countries. What eased this transition, however, was the first and second Malayan five-year plan. Strategic documents which prioritize the growth of agriculture and rural development. Since then, our country has undergone an economic miracle which can actually be charted in our previous pivots of diversification. The first pivot our leaders made was in commodities. We recognized that we had to reduce our economic reliance on rubber and tin. Instead, palm oil and petroleum became a lucrative revenue source and globalized our export reach. The subsequent inflow of investments enabled our second pivot into manufacturing. This was psychologically defining for our people. Instead of extracting our natural resources, we were building things. A rising electronics industry, highways that connected the north and south, and iconic buildings that modernized our skylines. The third pivot, I believe, has yet to come. We've gone through two pivots, and we have to go through the third pivot. With RMK 13, we are not looking at just the next 5 years, but envisioning what Malaysia will look like in 2040. Taking this high vantage approach forces us to think beyond individual policies to determine what will drive the next generations of Malaysia's economy. Ladies and gentlemen, economic prospects are intrinsically defined by demographics and geography. Southeast Asia is projected to grow at a CAGR of 4% until 2040. And that will enable Southeast Asia to become the fourth largest economy in the world by then. Malaysia is sitting at the center of global growth. It falls on us then, within that time span, we are projected to be a country of 40 million people, and therefore it is upon us to contend with the giant markets of India and China. This is why the third pivot of diversification is critical. I would argue that Malaysia must become a consumption powerhouse, an economy that is primarily driven by our people will be the most important determinant of our long-term trajectory and growth rate. By boosting domestic demand, we kickstart a virtuous economic cycle. Higher private consumption creates more jobs across all sectors in retail, services, and manufacturing. This translates to lower unemployment and higher disposable income. This increase in savings helps to localize investments into better public infrastructure such as healthcare and education. A healthier and better educated people creates a more productive society, one that reinvests in lifelong talent development and stems brain drain. It creates the capacity to design and innovate, shaping an economy that is more resilient to fluctuations in global markets, trade disputes, and geopolitics. However, placing this enhanced focus on consumption will not come at the expense of our export-oriented economy. It's about recognizing the current imbalance between the two drivers and creating urgency to close the gap. Marrying a traditionally trading-based economy with greater consumption diversifies our growth and mitigates risks. To materialize this pivot, we have to take a different approach to our 5-year plans. Over time, successive policy documents have grown in length, and when I first came to the office, I had to spend 1 week going through voluminous plans, sectoral plans, 5-year plans, digital plans, and everything. And I think we all understand that our policy documents in the past have become increasingly lengthy and have grown in complexity, and making it difficult for ordinary people to live. And that is a challenge for any government. Because if we were to make a pivot, we need everyone to be on board. And we need to shape the public discourse to focus on what is most productive in our society. And while we have to carry on with the nitty-gritty of economic and social planning, we also hope that we take a slightly different approach for RMK 13. So this is our vision. RMK 13 will be more similar to RMK 1. A strategic document that is equally concise and comprehensive. Each word must be committed towards a specific policy direction. Anyone, and I'm looking at you guys, we all have been doing this for quite a while, anyone who has written a concise essay, let alone a 5-year plan, knows this is not an easy task. It is easier to write volumes of document than writing a very concise but strategic document as important as RMK 13. Of course, the other challenge is known, which is our commitment to radical reform. So we have to make it concise, yet we have to make it very punchy with radical reforms. The planning phase of RMK 13 is akin to a blank canvas. I keep telling my team at the Ministry of Economy why RMK 13 is extremely important. It's because this is a chance for us to start with a blank canvas. Therefore, we want to gather creative ideas and inputs from as many people as possible to create a status quo free space to voice concerns and nudge the government in the right direction. Obviously, it is a job of a government to harmonize everything. Every demand and every policy imperative will have its own sets of unintended consequences. But that doesn't stop us from thinking radically about how we want to pivot our society towards 2040. Then what we will do at Kementerian Ekonomi is we will work backwards to map out the priority items we want to set for the country's future. Crucially, it is actually getting the sequencing of policies correct. I know that if we were to talk to different stakeholders, everyone has your priorities. But these priorities compete with each other. And I've repeated this internally and also to the media and to the international community. Perhaps what may define this administration's tenure is our ability to balance the need for proper sequencing of radical reforms. Because we have to make sure that if you want to be radical, you can sustain that radicalness. And because of that, building the foundations that allow for the right sequencing is extremely important. That's why for the last 20 months in preparation for this very important policy document, we have rolled out reforms in pocket sizes. We didn't go with huge volumes of reform policies. We've done it in bits and pieces. And I think that the last 20 months was enough as far as experience and learning curve was concerned for us to convince ourselves that we will have the room to maneuver and adapt to these competing priorities and the public's and stakeholders' feedbacks to make sure that RMK 13 will really relate to the public stakeholders and yet at the same time is strategic enough to pivot our economy towards 2040. Let me give one example, and this is extremely sensitive and is extremely divisive, which is on labour market reform. We have stakeholders from employers here, we have stakeholders from employees. It's very difficult to talk about labour market reform in this country, especially on issues of wages and productivity. Before jumping into creating higher value jobs or focusing on unemployment, and that's the traditional approach. Every time we talk about labour market reform, we talk about higher value jobs, jobs creation, we talk about, especially from the macro perspective, unemployment. But we also know that the most pressing issue with the labour market is actually stagnating wages. The rollout of the progressive wage policy, for example, tackles this while it is a work in progress, but at least it addressed the most important issue as far as the labour market is concerned. And by solving this note first, or giving signal that we intend to tackle this very difficult and complex issue, policy discussions on TVET then or on gig economy are suddenly productive. We can engage all the stakeholders on the long-term labour market reform. Otherwise, it's a policy discussion that only reverberate in halls like this, but doesn't relate to the people outside. And policymakers, economists, bosses usually make this mistake. We see everything from our perspective, and obviously we have a bird's eye view of everything, and that's given. But unless we are able to convince the bigger stakeholders that some of the most important issues from their perspective are being resolved, are being addressed, then policy documents after policy documents will not have the intended impact on our planning and society in the future. So likewise, for RMK 13, we hope that we will continue paying particular attention to sequencing of policy rollouts, and by doing this, the government will be more efficient in allocating our resources. Ladies and gentlemen, given this background, my ministry will be organizing a series of engagement sessions and focus groups in all states across Malaysia. The horror of preparing RMK 13 previously is only known to the people who have to toil days and nights, sometimes 18 to 19 hours a day for 1 year preparing it. And what usually happens is that it will then go to Parliament, it will be presented, and then within weeks or months, it disappears. To government departments, RMK 13 is extremely important because this is where we set our spending ceiling, for example. This is where we will commit how much development expenditure the government will be spending between 2026 and 2030. So government agencies and the public sector will be queuing with their plans for the next 5 years. But in the past, usually that was only confined to government ministries. So that's why it is extremely important to bring other stakeholders to have a stake in RMK13. Part of it is by becoming extremely radical in what we want to do, so that we provide the vision for the future, and people know these are the sequence of policies and actions and programs that have to be put in place, and hopefully the whole country understand the trade-offs that we have to make between different policy priorities. But we also want to make sure that the public takes interest in charting the future of the country as much as the policy makers who toil 18 to 19 hours a day preparing this. And while it may not be the most important part of the final policy document, this process is a prerequisite in making sure that our efforts for RMK13 will not go to waste. And because of that, we will go around and we will do a lot more engagements, create the hype, extract the positive vibe and energy in society, and we will gather public thinkers, private players, and everyday people to listen to constructive feedback. I only ask for one understanding. As I mentioned in the beginning, each stakeholder has competing priorities. And for every ask and for every vision that we conjure for our sector, for our groups, it will require some trade-offs. And because of that, I know that the risk of going around and getting everyone on board to plan for the country is that after the whole process is completed, you will have people saying that it's a waste of time because the final document does not reflect what I wanted. But it is a process, and I can assure you that while eventually we have to harmonize everything and we have to sequence, I'm hoping that our commitment to make RMK13 as radical as possible will allow for the sequencing of all priorities. It may not be rolled out immediately, but the seed or the foundation for each imperative and each policy trajectory will begin with RMK13, so that with the right sequence, I think we will be able to balance the needs and the requirements of every stakeholder. So I want to personally invite each of you and everyone out there to play an active role in this process. We have about 6 months. And hopefully the next 6 months will be the most productive 6 months for society when it comes to charting our future together. And the success of RMK13 and Malaysia's potential to be a consumption powerhouse does not depend entirely on the government. I came from private sector. I used to have a slightly different view about the majority of my ex-colleagues in private sector. I actually didn't believe that the government is the most important stakeholder in this country. I feel like the stake is bigger with the private sector, with the individual Malaysians and so on. So I always question the need for governments to regulate everything, to decide everything, or even I question the need for big policy documents like the volumes of plans after plans after plans being tabled in Parliament. Now that I'm on this side of the divide, And having seen how the market reacts to some of policy signals of government in the last 20 months, government does have a very important role in shaping the trajectory of our economy. Apart from our public finances, it is extremely important to provide the vision, and hopefully the vision will align everyone's vision so that we can move in tandem towards our shared vision 5 years down the road and 15 years down the road. But having said that, it does not depend entirely on the government. It requires a whole of nation, and we need everyone to feel that they have a stake and they have to invest in our country's future. So ladies and gentlemen, this is a kick-off conference. What is important is not my speech. What is important is what do we make out of these 2 days of the kick-off conference, and the subsequent process that will happen at different layers of society in the next 6 months, and the final product, which will be tabled in Parliament in July 2025. So, but this is an extremely important window, and I hope that I've given you a blank canvas to begin with. And I'm very much excited to see how that blank canvas eventually will fall and will come together as perhaps the most important document in the next 5 to 6 years for this country. So ladies and gentlemen, dengan semangat itu, dan saya harap dengan harapan yang berkobar-kobar, this is your chance. Saya berharap persidangan ini akan membuka jalan supaya kita melihat keluar daripada kepompong dan kekangan yang sedia ada. Dan nasihat saya ialah don't be afraid to be imaginative, terutamanya kepada kaki tangan awam. Setiap kali kita memikirkan sesuatu yang kita rasa perlu dibuat dengan lebih baik, kita dilatih untuk turut sama memikirkan semua kekangan yang akan menggagalkannya. Jadi akhirnya sebelum pun kita mula, kita dah gagal. So I hope with the blank canvas, don't fear imagination. Push the boundary. Tugas untuk menentukan kekangan mana, masalah mana, tugas itu ialah tugas pengurusan dan kepimpinan. Itu bukan tugas saudara-saudari. Tugas saudara-saudari ialah mengambil kira diagnosis sedia ada, mengambil kira keperluan negara, mengambil kira wawasan yang terbaik untuk negara, dan itulah yang akhirnya akan dikumpulkan, dan mereka yang bertanggungjawab dan beramanah above your pay grade will have to decide, and that's the measure of our effectiveness, either dekat jemaah Menteri, sama ada saya sebagai Menteri Ekonomi, sama ada pimpinan-pimpinan kementerian dan agensi. Jadi mereka yang terlibat dalam tempoh 6 bulan ini, saya ingin menyeru supaya kita ketepikan segala kekangan yang ada, mula dengan imajinasi yang besar, dan kalau itu kita boleh buat, insya-Allah itu akan membina keyakinan kepada kita untuk sama-sama melangkah maju dan yakin bahawa negara Malaysia akan menjadi sebuah negara yang berpengaruh dalam ekonomi dunia, sebuah negara yang sejahtera, mengambil kira semua kelebihan-kelebihan yang akan ada bukan sahaja kepada Malaysia tetapi kepada ASEAN dalam tempoh 10 ke 15 tahun akan datang. Dengan harapan dan doa itu, saya sudahi. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Yang Berhormat Ramli. Dipersilakan Yang Berhormat bakal berada di pentas ketiga. dan seterusnya majlis menjemput barisan kepimpinan tertinggi Kementerian Ekonomi untuk bersama-sama dengan Yang Berhormat Rafizi Ramli bagi menyaksikan dan menyempurnakan upacara peluncuran. Kini kita akan saksikan upacara peluncuran Persidangan Permulaan Rancangan Malaysia Ketiga Belas yang akan disempurnakan oleh Yang Berhormat Menteri. Majlis dengan segala hormatnya mempersilakan Yang Berhormat Menteri untuk berada di hadapan skrin AI dan memulakan peluncuran dengan interaksi bersama AI kita. Nampaknya AI tak kena kopi kot.
Selamat pagi, YB Rafizi. Selamat datang ke Persidangan Permulaan Rancangan Malaysia Ketiga Belas. Nama saya Aira. Saya akan membantu YB untuk peluncuran persidangan pada pagi ini. Jika kita telah bersedia, sila tumpukan perhatian kepada skrin. Dengan kiraan 1. Pelancaran Persidangan Permulaan Rancangan Malaysia Ketiga Belas diaktifkan sekarang.
Terima kasih diucapkan kepada Yang Berhormat Rafizi Ramli dan terima kasih kepada Aira. Dipersilakan Yang Berhormat Menteri dan Yang Berhormat untuk berada di tengah pentas untuk sesi bergambar. Dipersilakan. One photo with the AI. Kita teruskan terlebih dahulu dengan pelancaran portal. Jadi dijemput Yang Berhormat untuk sekali lagi berinteraksi bersama dengan skrin kita untuk menyempurnakan pelancaran portal.
Tanya YB, peluncuran Persidangan Permulaan Rancangan Malaysia Ketiga Belas telah berjaya. Seterusnya, peluncuran portal Rancangan Malaysia Ketiga Belas. Portal ini akan menjadi rujukan dan pusat informasi RMK13. YB, sila tekan butang enter di skrin ini.
Terima kasih sekali lagi Yang Berhormat Rafizi Ramli, dan portal ini memberi ruang dan peluang pada Yang Berhormat Tuan-tuan dan Puan untuk berinteraksi bersama dengan kami dan menyampaikan pandangan menerusi segmen pandangan awam. Dipersilakan Yang Berhormat Rafizi Ramli dan Yang Berhormat untuk berada di tengah pentas bagi sesi bergambar. Dan dijemput dengan itu tuan-tuan dan puan dan berhormat untuk terus melayari portal kita yang baru saja disempurnakan untuk mendapat sedikit sebanyak makluman dan juga atur cara pergerakan kita sepanjang 2 hari bersama Persidangan Permulaan Rancangan Malaysia Ketiga Belas. Terima kasih kepada rakan-rakan media. Seterusnya dijemput Yang Berhormat Rafizi Ramli dan Yang Berhormat untuk turun kembali ke tempat duduk bagi kita merakam satu lagi gambar. Dan gambar seterusnya akan dirakam bersama dengan seluruh sidang hadirin. Jadi dijemput jurugambar rasmi dan jurugambar media untuk berada di atas pentas. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to invite everyone to kindly rise so we can pack everyone into this photograph as we have our photographers on stage and they will be recording this photo with all of you in the hall. So we'd like to invite you to fill up the center. If you could kindly move to your right and left to make sure the center is packed. Lampu okey, kamera? Okey, dari segi pencahayaan nampaknya lengkap untuk gambar ini dirakam. Terima kasih rakan-rakan media dan terima kasih kepada Yang Berhormat Tuan-tuan dan Puan. Dipersilakan untuk mengambil tempat duduk.